Heresy Alpha, Book 1 of the Marian Imperium. Chapter 8, Marcus. The guards hurled Cassian out, and the courtroom doors slammed behind him. Silence descended on the Curia. Marcus looked out. Through a chink in the black armour of the Caledonian firmament, the sun appeared. The zenith. The morning was already past, and the whole sorry business was far from over. By now, the entire mile was little more than a saffron mass of drunken demesmen. The barbarians had never been able to hold their drink, least of all during the festive season. He loathed this time of year. There was always trouble. If it had his way, he'd have done with it all long ago. At least the storm would send them all scuttling home, and the sooner the better. Why the powers that be had reinstated all that nonsense was beyond him. Hadn't the Saturnal originally been a pagan festival anyway? Pagan. His mind skidded on the word, like a boot slipping in an unsavoury residue on the cobblestones. It quickly yielded to another, still more unhappy one, a word that woke him brutally from his reverie, recalling him summarily to the cold sterility of the courtroom. A word from his native tongue, yet one whose soft consonants pained him more than any Caledonian grunting ever could. A word he'd desperately hoped to escape in the north. Heresy. How had it come to this? Perhaps he ought to have just locked Cassian away at once, but it was too late for that now. The fool had invoked the Alpha Heresy, and done so publicly. The law now required a full religious inquisition. The syncelos of the diocese himself would have to be involved for the ecclesiastical cross-examination. Only the heretic's recantation would suffice, followed by his re-indoctrination. That failing, it was the supreme measure: death. Marcus had never been particularly fond of any priest. They were a patronising bunch at the best of times, and had never met one who wasn't in love with the sound of his own voice. Solon Tsimiskes, the high sacerdote of Caledon, was a classic example. The smooth old Greek was a sophist of the first order, a typical eunuch, always playing with words, and as cruel as they came. He dearly wished he could have avoided having anything to do with the priest, or with the fides at all, but Cassian had left him no choice. There were risks in involving Solon. Those rumours about Hypatia, where had the gossiping pleb heard them from? They ought to have stayed down south. What if Solon dragged it all out in court? Not that he'd have brought it up at dinner. Such things weren't spoken of in polite society, but the public curia was another matter. If the plebs started rambling again, Solon wouldn't let that opportunity slip, for there was nothing a sacerdote loved more dearly than reminding his temporal lord of his own moral superiority. "Your Excellency?" Severa asked, with a polite clop of her heels, as if trying not to wake him from his reverie. He examined her dress again, and frowned. "Sacerdos," Marcus commanded. "Summon the priest, Solon Tsimiskes. Get that old Greek in here, and quick about it. I don't care what debauchery he's up to today with his deacons. No excuses, you hear? Even if he's holed himself up in that cathedral of his. I don't care. Drag him out, and get him in here." The starlight, which had settled back to a pale green after Cassian left the room, acquired a lemon tinge. He pursed his lips, fingering his rosary. Even unseen, the Caledonian was fraying his nerves. "Yes, Your Excellency, of course. But I also wondered, Exarch, if I may," Severa asked, with a strange insistence in her voice. "I wondered whether Your Excellency might wish to consider the option of the reservation." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. The reservation? The dispensation available to a senior magistrate to spare the convicted heretic in favour of life imprisonment in the last reserve of the old law. The injection that put them into a stupor, their transcontinental transfer by armoured light craft, and, by the time they woke up, electrified adamantine walls on all sides. No means of escape, no techne, no contact, no chance of ever infecting anyone outside again. To all intents and purposes, dead to the world. It was extremely rare, and only used when the heretic was so important that application of the supreme measure was impossible. Or, rarer still, but not unknown, even if never admitted, were cases where the heretic was in fact no heretic at all, but merely someone whose existence was an inconvenience to the state, or else to someone powerful. Neither circumstance applied here. I would strongly advise an exception is made in this case, Governor, Severa persisted, for reasons of a political consideration. The accused's claim to thanehood— What on earth is a thane? He interrupted. It is nothing to me what he claims to be. He's a perfect nobody from the gutter. He will recant, or he will burn. Just get the high sacerdote in here, will you? Solon, kindly summon his eminence the Synkelos, whose presence the exarch requires forthwith for his religious opinion in a judicial proceeding. Yes, for his religious opinion. Severa cantered back across the marble towards the doors, her fingers jabbing sullenly at her tabula as she went. Basilica, Marcus grumbled, entranced by the undulation of her skin-tight skirt. Why couldn't she follow the regulations? They were there for a reason. He turned to Constantin, but the tribune clearly had no interest in what women did or didn't choose to wear. A true soldier, with focus, as he had once been himself, in better days, when he'd served with Agnes Radomira, the Ruthenian centurion. He was ashamed of losing his former discipline. It was all Hypatia's fault for making him go to this backwater alone, and now he'd let himself get drawn into this whole sorry business. Half an hour later, the doors opened, and a gaunt man about the same age as Marcus entered the courtroom. His slight build and delicate features, together with his clean-shaven olive cheeks and ultramarine eyes, combined to give him an artificial impression of freshness and youth. This impression was enhanced by his starched dalmatic tunic and overlaying white chlamys, emblazoned with its red star. Their heavy fabric covered the entirety of his emaciated body, while his golden syncelic diadem concealed his baldness. He was flanked by two blonde Caledonian youths, both sporting the same dalmatica and condescending smile. Severa followed in their wake. Marcus glanced up, but did not rise to greet the priest. He was immediately irked by the sight of the man, whose carefree life had told more easily on him than his own. He examined the screen before him, pretending to scrutinise some court records. Out of the corner of his eye, he noted with pleasure that Constantin made no salute. That was of course correct, since regulation did not require the honour for those of non-military rank, even if some of the cathedral guards had made the habit of doing so. He waited until the priest stood before the tribunal, waving his hand over the screen as if perusing a particularly uninteresting report of the publicans. The Synkelos needed to know who was in charge from the outset, lest he try anything during the Inquisition. At length, Marcus raised his eyes lazily, but Solon retained an oleaginous smile, one which in no way menaced the upper half of his face. The Greek's pale eyes were steely and unkind. Marcus looked him up and down, glancing sidelong at the adolescents, and, seeing that the eunuch had been carousing, suppressed the full expression of his disdain. He had most likely been in his cups, and his oily tongue might be even freer than usual. "Chaire, agapita file," Solon said at last, hailing Marcus as if he were an old friend. "May the Virgin protect you. Always a pleasure, my dear exarch." He spoke well, but his aristocratic Greek was unnaturally high-pitched. He inclined his head almost imperceptibly. His presumed familiarity riled Marcus intensely. "Chaire, Synkele," he replied, nodding still more imperceptibly as he dispensed with the usual formalities. "I thank you for your attendance at this short notice." The corners of Solon's thin lips curled. The priest was actually expecting an apology. He immediately resolved that he would get none. "The matter is one of only limited consequence," Marcus continued, resuming his mien of feigned boredom. "However, as you will no doubt have surmised, it is, unfortunately, one of a judicial competence." A conceited smile still painted the eunuch's countenance. He waved his hand imperiously at his attendant deacons, who left the courtroom. "Pray excuse my ignorance, exarch," Solon began, as soon as the doors closed. "I do not mean to be importunate, but if the matter is one of a judicial competence, What need has your excellency of the presence of the ministers of Our Lady? Her servants surely cannot better our respected governor's knowledge of the laws, nor the quaestorial clerk's understanding of the codex and the latest amendments thereto. He looked at Severa and Constantin with an innocent smile. Marcus glowered at the sacerdote. Why was he playing the fool? He knew exactly why he was there. There was no reason a Synkelos would be called into court if the issue didn't concern heresy. The diabolical eyes of the Caledonian twinkled before him like sapphires, and his neck grew hot. He loosened the top button of his uniform. Annoyingly, Solon noticed. His eyes glinted. Yes, the matter is one of a judicial competence, Marcus replied, endeavouring to look through him, but it is also one which, to use the language of your order, is contingent upon a matter of the Fides Marianea. Solon's eyes flashed as Marcus formally invoked the name of the Marian faith. Then it is perhaps not, after all, a matter altogether without significance. May I ask what the charge is that is laid against the accused? Heresy, Marcus replied. The priest's jaw fell, and his eyebrows arched. He almost looked afraid. He turned to Severa and Constantin in feigned perplexity, but his face lost none of its colour. Severa swayed unsteadily on her heels, but Marcus observed with satisfaction that Constantin was in no way moved by the priest's little act. In fact, the tribune hadn't acknowledged Solon's presence at all since he arrived. A serious matter indeed, Solon exclaimed, pretending to recover his composure. And to think, a case of heresy here in our good little province, so far from all the sin and intrigue that, alas, though it pains me to admit it, plague the capital today. Marcus stared at the eunuch. He knew no one believed him, so why did he insist on carrying on his dramatic prelude? Was he expecting the Apollonial laurel? He ought rather to be flayed. But you must excuse me, Your Excellency. I can get rather carried away, Solon said. I understand why, and indeed I am glad that you have involved the religious authorities at once in a matter of such import. I shall not hesitate to lend my assistance to the gathering of the required evidence ahead of the Inquisition. As he peered meaningfully at Marcus, his mouth twisted into a wry smile. The priest was clearly convinced the exarch needed someone shut up in the reservation, someone inconvenient, and likely no heretic at all. The venial eunuch was preparing to name his price for his religious assent. Alas, Synkelos, such is the seriousness of the matter that I fear it cannot wait even a single day, no, not even a feast day. We must move to an ecclesiastical inquisition at once, Marcus said. Solon's eyebrow rose. Marcus smiled inwardly. No more cavorting for the old eunuch today. But, Your Excellency, and again I must plead your forbearance, for my knowledge of the Lex Justiniana cannot possibly rival your own, Solon answered, his thin lips curling again. Is not a preliminary proceeding first needed to establish the evidence before moving to a full religious inquisition? He smiled politely. Your interpretation of the law is quite correct, High Sacerdote, Marcus replied. The preliminary proceeding was held this morning. While it is indeed, as you say, a matter of the faith with which you are concerned here, the accusation had, at the outset, only attracted a civil penalty. You have no doubt already sought the recantation by the accused of their false beliefs, Solon asked. The accused has so far shown no inclination to recantation, Marcus replied. I am sure you will appreciate that, if proven, such a charge may attract the highest criminal penalty under the law, that is, res capitalis. Why indeed, Excellency, that is quite right, as the proscription laws of the Lex Justiniana require, and moreover, I believe I am not much mistaken in understanding that, in this particular case, the accused may also be a figure of a certain local standing, Solon asked, forgetting the legal ignorance he had pleaded a moment earlier. That is, a Caledonian catapano of sorts. As such, I assume Your Excellency is also giving due consideration to the reservation transfer procedure. Yes, that is what the accused claims, Marcus replied, his eyes lighting angrily on Severa. But I have seen no evidence in this case, beyond their own assertions, to justify the finding that they are a figure of any influence or importance. The only circumstances that have been clearly attested are that the accused is of a heretical persuasion, and that he shows no inclination towards a recantation of his false beliefs." "You mean to say," Solon said, a genuine shade of doubt entering his eyes, "that you are persuaded that the accused is a genuine adherent of the Alpha Heresy?" "Why, yes, High Sacerdote," Marcus said impatiently. "Why else would I have had recourse to summon your Syncelic Eminence to attend this hearing on a feast day?" Solon studied him with alarm, trying to determine whether he was serious. "But surely, Governor, with all due respect," he stammered, "you would not take so unorthodox a step as to exclude the dispensation of the reservation in a capital matter without first involving the higher authorities." His feet twitched, as if he were about to bolt for the door. Well, neither here nor there to an exarch. For a high sacerdote, a convicted heretic in his diocese wasn't a good look. It would leave a black mark on his ecclesiastical cursus. Not much chance of making Grand Synkelos of the city after that. As I have said, the accused is of only plebeian standing, and as such I find no political justification for the reservation procedure in this case, Marcus said. Nonetheless, given the accused's own heretical testimony provided directly to this court, as the competent religious authority in my province, I require your ecclesiastical inquisition of the accused to ascertain whether a recantation may be elicited. Marcus rose, motioning to Severa to begin preparations. They'd do things the proper way, like last time. If Solon couldn't extract a recantation, the insolent heretic could go to the dogs, and the priest's reputation with him. When Marcus looked up, Solon's eyes had paled. The eunuch nodded stiffly and retreated towards the courtroom doors. He was surely already working up some subterfuge. Best not give him the chance. "Sister Adjunct, kindly convene the court to commence ecclesiastical inquisition in 1 hour, Marcus ordered, before Solon had reached the door. The priest halted. Severa's plucked eyebrows rose. Her lips moved, but Marcus glowered at her. Like a sleek black mare, she trotted towards the doors, overtaking the priest as she hastened to carry out her orders. Momentarily entranced, Marcus shook himself, wrath at himself for yet another lapse. An hour later, the accused was led back in. Seated on his throne, Marcus still wore his black uniform, but now donned the exarchal chain with its large golden star. Solon sat to his left, still arrayed in his white chlamys. Severa pointed the soldiers towards the dock. Placed beneath the windows, this consisted simply of a wooden seat. Marcus lowered at Cassian as he sat down. In the baleful half-light of the now raging storm, he was pleased to see the Caledonians sullen and taciturn. With a bit of luck, he'd have his recantation and apology by sundown. If not, he'd have him tied naked to the Gnostic steeple and see whether spending the Saturnal night on the Mall didn't change his mind. Carcerem claudite, Constantin commanded in his Novgorovian monotone. A thin, semi-liquid film fell from the ceiling around the dock. It briefly oscillated like water, then solidified, becoming as transparent as glass. There was no more than a flicker in the prisoner's dull eyes, who barely seemed to notice his incarceration at all. In nomine Matris et Virginis et Spiritus Sancti, Marcus commenced, with the usual formula, but left off as the doors reopened. A slightly built young woman in a long pale green dress entered, accompanied by 2 handmaidens. Her face was covered with a cerulean veil, through which nothing of her features could be discerned. The viridescent spectre said nothing and made no sign of greeting to anyone, but as she glided past them, the guards knelt. Solon sprang sycophantically to his feet, like a cork popping from an amphora. Marcus hastened to shut his gaping mouth, praying the Virgin be kind. His hand trembled as he pulled out the chair to his right. The resident Vestal of Britannia Major. She was of the highest dinatorial stock on her father's side, from a Bohemian family reaching back the empire's full 6 centuries, and not just that. Her mother was Princess Amalasuntha, the younger sister of the Empress. She was a royal. Her very presence was petrifying. How had she heard? His eyes found Solon. Of course, it was his doing. referring the matter up to a vestal to get the accused sent to the reservation and thereby salvage his own reputation. The damned eunuch knew there was no way a mere governor could gainsay a vestal. He'd outwitted him. In nomine Matris et Virginis et Spiritus Sancti, Marcus repeated, shakily. I call this court to order. This ecclesiastical inquisition is convoked to try matters pertaining to the Fides Marianea under the Lex Justiniana de Proscriptione Magna. He turned to his right. I thank my Lady of the Ordo Vestalis for the Cathedra of Britannia Maya, Her Royal Highness of the House of Premislid, and the Synkelos, High Sacerdote of Caledonia, for their attendance, he continued, bowing low to the woman, then nodding curtly to Solon. The vestal sat serenely, apparently unmoved by the sight of either the unkempt prisoner or of anything else around her. Citizen Cassian MacLeod, Marcus began, you stand accused of Heresy. As an offence under the Justinian laws of religious prescription, you do not have the right to legal representation. As required by those laws, I ask you, before the witnesses of their vestal and syncelic eminences, whether you wish to recant of your heresy. The vestal shifted at his last word, raising a hand to her veil. It made him uncomfortable. She was perhaps a third his age, but for him, as for any other mortal, the prospect of a vestal's pronouncement was terrifying. By contrast, Cassian had neither acknowledged her nor any of the proceedings taking place around him. He completely ignored Marcus's question, and a tense silence ensued. Everyone, save Cassian and the vestal, was affected by it. Even the guards, young men endeavouring to look the picture of severity, exchanged a nervous glance through the liquid glass. Severa's fingers performed a full circus over her tabula. Evidently, none had ever seen such a thing before. So be it, then, Marcus said at last, no longer daring to employ the lazy drawl he had that morning. Citizen Cassian MacLeod, in the absence of a recantation, you must submit to sacerdotal cross-examination to determine whether the charge be found valid. I call to witness the Synkelos of Caledonia, to whose diocese you belong, and who will therefore lead this inquisition. Solon rose, touching the red star on his chlamys and straightening his crown. Comporting himself with as much solemnity as he could, the priest ascended the tribunal and sauntered towards the dock. Marcus sank back into his throne, studying the vestal out of the corner of his eye. The whole business had gotten much riskier with her arrival. Besides, there was still the matter of his wife. The sooner it was through with, the better. He no longer cared how. He just needed shot of Cassian as soon as possible. Outside, the sky had briefly divested its stormy raiment. Such barbarians were as unpredictable as their weather. Perhaps he should have had him shut up in prison at once, where he couldn't cause any trouble, but it was too late for that. The prescriptorial inquisition was out of his hands now. Ahem. In nomine Matris et Virginis et Spiritus Sancti, I bless you, my child, you who are sine fide, Solon began. He glanced apprehensively at the vestal as he gave the sacerdote's customary benediction, which had none the less to be bestowed on anyone not yet condemned for heresy. The vestal shifted again and laid one of her pale wrists, sheathed in green silk, across her lap. Marcus tried not to admire her delicate freckled hands, nor her silver ring emblazoned with a crowned white lion. Let me begin by asking you, citizen, whether you are familiar with the tenets of the faith, Solon asked, fast regaining the habitual sanctimony of a preacher. For it may be that, in the poverty of your ignorance, you have never even encountered the holy wisdom of Our Lady, nor perhaps even heard of the gnosis of the Virgin. Cassian ignored him. His eyes were so dull, and his body so motionless, that it was as if he had been ossified into one of the bearded ghosts of the patriarchs, like some destituted icon from the past. This is scarcely believable, Solon exclaimed, his eyebrows raising nearly to the rim of his diadem. For the creed of the Hagia Sophia is known throughout the empire. Indeed, for 5.5 centuries, there hasn't been a soul from the Pillars of Hercules to the Kremlovskan camp. And yes, even here in farthest Caledon, who hasn't heard of the descension of Our Lady, and of our salvation through her gnosis? As his words bore him to a squeaky crescendo, drops of spittle flew from his mouth and collided with the liquid glass. He struck Marcus as more resembling an amphitheatrical actor than a provincial syncelos, or else some small-town lector chiding one of his wayward pupils. How had he, a soldier, ended up having to listen to the old fool's sermonising? His mind drifted back to the circus in Mariupol, and he remembered Hypatia. He straightened up, watching Cassian nervously. "Yet it seems, citizen, that you do not bear witness to that gnosis through which the Virgin became flesh many centuries ago," Solon asked, with a rhetorical flourish of his hand. He stepped up to the dock. As he peered into Cassian's vacant eyes, he pressed his lips so thinly that they were hardly visible. Marcus pondered whether the eunuch looked at his Caledonian boys like that during his nocturnal games, but suppressed the disgusting thought. "I am even informed," Solon said, "that not only do you fail to accept the truth of the dissension, but you do not even accept the destitution of the eros of the false prophet." His last words slipped from his lips almost as an afterthought, but they acted on Cassian like an electrobaton. The Caledonian's eyes swept the priest's emaciated frame as a broad grin spread across his face. Solon withdrew a step. "You claim," Solon repeated, but his voice wobbled. "Lapis," Cassian said, leaping to his feet and slamming his hands on the glass, causing the Vestal to start. "Lapis, lapis, lapis." The priest flinched, scanning the glass uneasily. "I am afraid I fail to understand what you mean by stone, citizen," Solon said, turning to the bench as he slowly regained his composure. "Do you, or do you not, recognise the destitution of that theurgist and son of the spirit of lie that gave himself out to be a god?" Cassian shut his eyes, as if the words had stung him like a nettle. "Answer the question, citizen," Solon said. "It is my view that you do not have any intention of recanting your false beliefs and entreating the clemency of Our Lady for your bodily salvation in this life, which being so, you are placed in great peril. Yes, in great peril indeed." He shot a meaningful glance at the Vestal. "Who shall cast the first stone?" Cassian asked, opening his cobalt eyes. As they scanned the eunuch's syncelic robe, red star and dainty golden crown, they seemed to be burning. "I am the one asking the questions here," Solon exclaimed. "I remind you, citizen, that it is you who are on trial." "I saw a great white throne and him that sat on it," Cassian said, "from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was no place found for them, and the dead were judged according to their works." Solon's face turned white. The Vestal touched her brow as if she were in pain. Marcus was alarmed. The heretic didn't care a jot what he said, not even with a Vestal in the room. And not just a Vestal, but a princess who was, at that very moment, under his exarchal protection. "How dare you, you vile dog!" Solon screamed. "How dare you speak such profanities here in the presence of her holy eminence? Retract these profanities at once, or I shall have no choice but to entreat her eminence to take the necessary measures to ensure your forcible—" He stopped in mid-flow. The Vestal had risen from her seat. Marcus pushed back his chair, but she was already descending the steps. Like a dryad borne by the waves, she glided across the curial floor, the jade silk of her dress rippling around her like an ancient marble. Solon bowed, retreating to the wings. The vessel approached the dock and stood before the glass. Everyone waited on her word. Even the storm had relented. For some time she remained so, as if she really were the mute and sea-girt apparition of a goddess. Then she signalled to the guards to open the dock. They looked in confusion at Constantin, who turned to Marcus. He was horrified. Was the princess even in her right mind? Heaven forfend that anything should happen to her royal person on his watch. That would assuredly be his end. There was nothing for it, though. The command of a Vestal maiden of Our Lady was sacrosanct. He nodded to Constantin. "Carcerum apparite," Constantin commanded. The glass quivered and became translucent as droplets ran down its surface. Finally, the entire pane collapsed into a small puddle, which drained away through a grille. The legionnaires' hands hovered over their batons, but Cassian remained still. It was the princess who moved first, drawing back her veil to reveal a strikingly beautiful face. Marcus had only seen the resident Vestal of the proconsulate on feast days, and always veiled. Now that he saw her properly for the first time, he realised how young she was. She was barely past her majority. Cassian grinned, and quite unexpectedly, the Vestal smiled back at him, her emerald eyes and delicate bohemian features lighting up with a radiance unlike anything Marcus had seen for many years. "I am Anastasia Premislovna, of the Ordo Vestalis. What is your name, my friend?" she asked. "My name's Cassian MacLeod, Thane of the Caledonians for my sins," he replied. He addressed the Vestal simply, as if he had not been in a courtroom or his life hadn't been in her hands. Marcus was stunned by his presumption. The idea that the pleb would address a Vestal and a royal thus, using his pretended title, defied belief, as if he were trying to impress any other commonplace wench from a Caledonian pothouse. He covered his mouth, masking the quaking of his jaw. "I am glad to meet you, Cassian MacLeod," the Vestal said with a smile, "although I am sorry to meet in such fashion, for it is indeed, alas, your sins that we are here to speak of today." Her smile faded, and her eyebrows contracted sadly. Her wide, earnest eyes were almost tearful. "Do you know what my name means?" she asked unexpectedly. "No, of course not. I am sorry. There is no reason why you should." Anastasia refers to the ascension, of a rising up, away from the sins of our besmirched world, to the unsullied heights of heaven. She almost looked apologetic, as if she were worried she were taxing Cassian unduly, but he was listening intently. "I think you know whose ascent back to heaven we are referring to?" Anastasia asked after a pause, her eyes shining beatifically. In the clear features of her face, over which a few of her tied-back locks had fallen like spun gold, Marcus could almost see the visage of the Virgin herself as she ascended. He suppressed the blasphemous thought, but the light still showed a steady green. "I'm thinking you mean the Holy Mary," Cassian answered. "If that's who your name honours, milady, then you're blessed to have such a name as that. Aye, that you are." Something like recognition glimmered in her eyes. "It is kind of you to say so," she said, though a hint of sadness had already entered her smile. "For what is this life? Indeed, what is the life of woman, and of man, at all, if it is lived without kindness? Our heterogeneity is our strength, yes, but what is that strength truly worth without kindness?" Turning away pensively, Anastasia failed to notice how Cassian's brows knitted, as if one of Caledon's sullen clouds had come to rest there. Marcus exchanged a nervous glance with Solon despite himself. "For many are our acts of unkindness, especially in our weaker moments," she continued, her bright eyes almost pleading as they fixed on Cassian. "Woman is weak, and man weaker still. It is so easy for us to stray from the true path illuminated by the Trinity. But if nothing else, we must always remember to be kind to Our Lady in what we say and in what we do." "Sorry, lassie, what did you say your name was again? Assumpta, wasn't it?" Cassian interrupted. "That's the name we use in these parts. Assumpta, aye, that's a fine name indeed, milady." Anastasia, who no longer faced Cassian, froze at the strange address. Marcus eyed the golden halo of her head with dread. The courier was completely silent, save for the slight rustling of Solon's chlamys. "Yes, above all else, we must never forget to return the kindness of the Mother who forgives us our sins, though we so little deserve it," she said, as if Cassian hadn't spoken at all. "Though we are weak, we must all strive to be worthy of the kindness of the Mother, for so beneficent is she, the Virgin Unsullied, that she pardons even those who insult and defile her virtue. For all mortal kind are weak, and among mortals no frailty is so great as that of the masculine, which was not made in her image. The Holy Trinity illumines the path of righteousness, and for the sinner, the three lights of the Mother, the Virgin, and the Holy Spirit are as bright stars that lead the repentant back to chastity. So then, my friend, search your heart and ask yourself truly, have you earned the kindness of the Mother by your actions?" "Assumpta, was it?" the prisoner repeated, a devilish light in his eyes. Marcus had the unpleasant sense of no longer listening to a conversation, but two coincidental monologues. He ought to have intervened, but that was impossible. Only a madman interrupted a Vestal, let alone a royal. Heresy, a squeaky voice broke in. How dare you? How dare you profane her eminence with your disgusting blasphemies? You are trying to be clever, yes, like your false prophet, but I see through your sophistries. You mean to suggest that Our Lady did not ascend to heaven of her own accord, but was taken up, assumed to heaven, assumpta, as your lot say, by your false deity? Solon's face was white with rage. Marcus glared at him. The sacerdote pressed his lips, containing himself only with difficulty. Then his face reddened as he realised his error. He lowered his eyes demurely, placing his hand on his chlamys star, but Anastasia only smiled at him forgivingly. You are mistaken, my friend, the Vestal said, closing her eyes, for my name is not Assumpta, but Anastasia. For the first time, there was a slight tremor in her voice. Marcus touched the back of his neck. He was sweating. Things were going from bad to worse. What if the princess's dinatorial kin complained? It might even reach the imperial court. At the very least, his boss would hear of it. It was extremely rare that a Vestal, let alone a royal, should have dealings with anyone outside her class, to say nothing of a homunculus like Cassian. Begging your pardon, milady, Cassian replied, a lambent sparkle in his eyes. I must have misheard your grace. Did you nae say that your name was about the mother going up to heaven and all? Solon was back on his feet, but Marcus glowered at him and he sat back down. Why had the old clown had to go and involve a Vestal? Yes, my friend, she said patiently, my name, Anastasia, refers to how the Virgin twice ascended, for, many centuries ago, in the days of the old patriarchs, the Maiden of Galilee was possessed by the Mother, who thereby became flesh and dwelt among us. But alas, the men of those days were blind to her holy gnosis, and were misled by the deceiver and the eros of his false prophet, and so, blighted in their memory, the new patriarchs led us far astray. The innate weakness of men ran its natural course, until, in those dark days 5.5 centuries ago, the infidel camped before the very walls of the city itself. But the Virgin did not forsake us, for she descended unto us again in the very hour of our direst need. In her possession of the Virgin Justinia, she laid her divine strength upon the saintly maiden, who set right the faith and destituted the tyranny of the false prophet. Thus the frailty of man was tempered. By the true faith alone was the empire reunited, and the holy wisdom of the Virgin, as foretold long ago by the venerable Egeria, at last made manifest. Then, her work done, the mother ascended a second. It's a pretty tale, that, lassie, Cassian broke in. That it is. But there's only one ascension that I know of. There's only one who ascended to heaven. There's only one who rose of their own power, and it was near the Holy Mother. The starlight became burgundy. That is unkind of you, Anastasia said uncertainly. I do not believe you know what you say. Yet in speaking so, my friend, you do our mother a great unkindness. For what I say is simply the truth, long known to all. The mother twice ascended. In your heart, you surely know that this is unkind, Cassian interrupted again, his eyes blazing with a new fire. You see, lassie, I hate to say it, but I can nae make out what you mean by that. Thing is, I look around me here, and I see a lot of unkindness to my people. And last time I checked, it's your lot who are in charge here, are you nae? He waved derisively at the tribunal, then at the city below. Sweat ran down the back of Marcus's tunic in a torrent. Cassian had insulted a royal. It was too late to shut him up in the reservation now. The pleb would have to be made an example of, and publicly. The palace would insist on that. That meant his own neck was on the line too. You do our mother a great unkindness, Anastasia stammered, almost to herself. Yes, what you say is unkind, for Our Lady was not assumed to heaven, for the simple reason that she alone is the Queen of Heaven, and there is none other than her that reigns there. That may be your truth, lassie, but I can tell you, it's no truth of mine, Cassian said, flecks of foam gathering in his red beard, and it ne'er will be. Kindness. What's kind about your lady? If she lets so many go without, and even lets the slave barns starve in the street, while you lot sit here talking about your lady. No kindness in that, aye, lassie. The Thane would ne'er brook it. Am I to understand by your words, Anastasia asked very slowly, that you do not hold with the doctrine of the one and only Queen of Heaven? With horror, Marcus noted how all the colour had left her face. She really had hoped to save Cassian, after all. He locked his hands together, trying to stop their violent trembling. The room grew still. Outside, even the storm gods held their breath. The brazen smile deserted Cassian's face. Instead, some new feeling worked there. Something serious, heretofore unseen, was contending with his innate brashness. Like the burning pediment of a temple, his eyebrows arched, and for the briefest moment he seemed afraid. Then, as if some martial god had lain his gauntlet upon the temple, resolution flattened them again. He stared at Anastasia defiantly, almost with hatred. "Aye, little girl, that I don't," he said. "For our Holy Mother sits in heaven, arrayed in splendour among all the saints and the heavenly host, beside the throne of our—" "Blasphemy!" Solon squealed. "Heresy! How dare you profane her name? My lady, I urge you most humbly, for the sanctity of Our Lady and the honour of your royal person, to confine this heretic at once." Marcus was on his feet, about to shout him down, but Cassian beat him to it. "I'm perfectly in my right mind, you old hypocrite, and I mean what I say," he yelled. "Beat me as much as you like, but don't even think of packing me off to your prison. I willna go there, even if you force me. The Thane would rather die than suffer that disgrace. Aye, that he would." His words beat Solon backwards, and he tripped over his bench. Anastasia's face was completely white, her distress and confusion plain to all. Marcus was sweating like a pig. The princess had definitely meant to save Cassian, be it by recantation or the reservation. That could not happen now. Understanding dawned upon him. Cassian had resolved to die for his beliefs. He even desired it. It made Marcus uneasy. Perhaps he oughtn't to have ruled out the reservation so quickly. Had the Caledonian planned his martyrdom all along? He did not know, but one thing was clear. By insulting a royal, Cassian meant to take the exarch down with him. "Heu mihi miserae," Anastasia said, pitying her own misfortune. "Then you are lost, alas." A look of genuine dejection spread across her handsome face, and her eyes grew bright. Marcus's cheeks were numb with terror. "I am left with no choice," she said despondently, "for I see that you are lost to the faith, irretrievably lost. Those outside the Fides are lost to the Mother, and shall not return to her." An expression of intense pity entered her face, more melancholy than anything he had ever seen. As if she herself were being condemned, rather than Cassian. So too for Marcus. Her words were edged with a steel sharper than any Saracene's sabre. He clutched his side, as his old wound from the slave riots burned. "The Virgin has offered you her clemency, Cassian MacLeod, but in return you have shown her only unkindness. Many times, citizen, you have been offered the chance to recant, but you have rejected her grace," Anastasia said. Her eyes were far away, as if she were speaking under compulsion, possessed by a voice not her own. The starlight flared, painting the room blood-red in the half-night of the storm. "Judicio Matris Virginis et Spiritus Sancti, by the authority of the Mother, Virgin, and the Holy Spirit, vested in me," the Vestal continued without enthusiasm, "I proscribe you, citizen, as anathema, you who are outside the Fides Marianea." Marcus blanched. This was not how it was supposed to happen. His wounds seared again, as if the slave who had dealt the blow had come back to life to finish the job. "Et te excommunicatum et anathematizatum esse decerno." "I declare you excommunicate and anathema," Anastasia managed to say, almost inaudibly. "Et damnatum cum fraudatore in ignem aeternum judico." "I judge you damned with the deceiver to the eternal fire." Her face was utterly cheerless, for all the world as if she had just committed herself to the everlasting flames. She replaced her veil. Constantin gave the command, and glass once more dripped from the ceiling. "Quae sine peccato est vestrum, primum lapidem mittat." Cassian said, as the liquid solidified around him. "She that is without sin among you, let her first cast a stone." Anastasia paused, already halfway up the tribunal steps. Then she hastily retook her place at Marcus's side, her sylph-like grace abandoning her. Her whole body was as stiff as a marble herm, and a muffled sob emanated from her veil. The truth stood before him, as clear as the Propontine sea. There was only one sentence left for him to pass. Nor was it just Cassian who was being condemned today. He was condemning himself too. "In nomine Matris et Virginis et Spiritus Sancti," he said, ignoring the pain in his side as he rose to his feet. "Citizen Cassian MacLeod, from the evidence set before this court and your own testimony, I find you guilty of the crime of heresy under the Lex Justiniana de Prescriptione Magna of the 29th year of Our Lady's Descension." Solon skulked in a corner, trying to make himself scarce. Who could blame him? As for himself, there was nowhere left to hide. An insult to a royal. On his watch, he was done for. "As the penalty prescribed by the law for your crime, for one duly declared anathema," he pronounced, "I, Marcus Comnenus, Exarch of Caledonia and President of the High Strategic Tribunal of the province, hereby sentence you to the supreme measure." "Carcerem aperite," Constantin said, as for a final time the glass melted away. Seizing Cassian by the shoulders, the legionnaires yanked him to his feet. He tried to resist, but wasn't fast enough, crying out as an electric shock ran through him. The batons touched him a second time, and he collapsed. The guards dragged him away, as if he were already a corpse, but he managed to raise his bleary eyes to the tribunal. "Damning me, are you?" Cassian called back at Marcus, writhing as he slid across the marble. "Aye, it's one rule for your lot and another for us, isn't it?" The Vestal shuddered. Marcus's face turned pink. He did his best to pretend he hadn't heard, trying not to picture Hypatia, nor what she was up to while he was stuck out there alone on her account, his reputation in tatters. "I know what your wife is up to, Governor," Cassian said, swatting away one of the guards. "Hypocrites! Look to your own. Look to your own first, you hear?" Marcus looked out the window, desperately trying to ignore the diabolical voice. The sky over Caledon was altogether pitch now as the night came on. Pain shot through his side, and the black clouds danced in a Charybdian swirl. "That's right, you heard what I said," the condemned man persisted, as the guards heaved him with a final titanic effort through the curial doors. "Look to your own house first, before you go condemning others. Look to the Lady Hypatia. Quae sino peccator est, she who is without sin." There was another bolt of pain, and the storm became a hurricane. "Silence, heretic," he said, losing control. "How dare you?" His words died in his mouth. He clutched his side. Anastasia flinched. Lightning illuminated the courtroom, extinguishing the red light as the chair slipped from beneath him. His eyes rose to the pewter sky. The courtroom disappeared, and the hurricane dissolved into the mist on the Bosphorus. He gasped for air. His throat was raw, and he felt sick. Someone was pressing on his chest. Soft hair brushed against his face. It was a pleasant feeling. He opened his eyes. Blonde hair and the generous proportions of a woman's chest came into view, rising and falling above him. A familiar voice was calling him. "Excellency," Severa asked, shaking his shoulders. "Are you okay?" Marcus sat up, brushing her aside. A tall man in a white uniform stood over him. His tribune's face came into focus, framed against the vernal evening sky. The star of the Virgin shone over the stadium. The proconsular box was empty. The legates and officials had all disappeared. Down below, the last of the demes were leaving the stands, their yellow and green scarves trailing behind them. There was no sign of Flavian, nor of any of the other governors. No sign of Argira, nor her entourage. He was finished. He tried to rise, but his hand slipped on his matrician cuffs, and he fell back with a thud.